Good morning. This is Bill Ellermeyer. This segment will be coming from our guest speaker today, Aamar Khwaja.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. I'll jump right into it. We've entered a world where we as people have relinquished control of our food to corporations and chemical giants. The casualty to this is the health and well-being of people. The driver behind the centralization in food across the entire value chain is the growth in cities. So the scope of my talk will be urban centers, not rural areas, which require different sets of solutions. So there will be 50 megacities, which is 10 million people or more by the year 2050, where 66% of the global population will be living. Food, as you expand cities, is a secondary consideration. It's somebody else's problem. And that somebody is a corporation. So this talk will center upon what's happening to farming and as a consequence to food and its implications. Then I'll talk about a solution towards the end that we're working on as a startup on where we're trying to change this paradigm back to the way it was. But first, let's define food. Food is a means to transport absorbable essentials to your cells. Now, I use the word essentials. It is commonly used in our circles. It's a bucket term that includes minerals, microminerals or macrominerals, enzymes, amino acids, and so on and so forth. So just keep that in mind. Before I get into the talk, I wanted you to meet someone, meet me. For the bulk of my professional life, I worked on Wall Street. Each and every day, from morning to night, I dealt with chronic fatigue. And along with chronic fatigue, I dealt with eczema. My eczema was so bad that when I used to pick up my briefcase, my palms would tear. And then there were the headaches, actually migraines. The migraines were so debilitating that the doctors would pump me with Demerol, and that still wouldn't give me relief. So fast forward a number of years, when I came to Toronto, I've been living in Toronto for the last 13 years, and I've just left Toronto. I started looking into my own health and was surprised. Anything that I was really suffering from was a mineral deficiency. When I asked what minerals are and where they come from, the answer is, of course, food. But even as I turned to the purest food, like organics and biodynamically grown food, in an effort to better my own health, I discovered that nearly 50% of organic food still contains trace pesticides. So organics aren't what they seem. So 3 statistics before I move on. We need 8, depending on who you speak to, 12 oranges to our grandfather's 1. On bionutrients.org, it says we need 200 carrots to one we ate just 100 years ago. And lastly, we had 497 varieties of lettuce. 100 years ago, there are less than 30. 100 years ago, food was central to communities. We used to live around farms. Our mothers and fathers used to walk to the farms. Food was on the table within 2 to 4 hours. Now it's between 5 to 10 days. It was fresh, it had taste, and it was healthy. Back then, people died of trauma and infection. 100 years ago, there were 6.6 million farms in America for 80 million people. One would think that as population grows, that the number of farms would grow too. But the exact opposite happened. Today, there are less than 2 million farms for over 350 million people. Today, farming is a large industrialized operation with heavy machinery, massive warehouses. It's become impersonal. chemical oriented and the food is commoditized, like Amazon farms. By the way, side note, Amazon buying Whole Foods is not a good thing. And hopefully I'll demonstrate that. Hopefully I'll demonstrate that we do not want economies of scale in food. Animals are treated as production beings, only to serve these ever expanding needs of our population centers. Love and care has been replaced by machinery, impersonal access, and a chemical basis to extract the maximum possible production from both animals, plants, and just as importantly, our soils. There were 750,000 fewer dairy cows in the UK compared to 2 decades ago. But we produce more milk today than at any time in 5 years. There are several consequences to this. As cities get larger, so does distribution demand. In fact, the entire value chain comes under pressure, causing Walmarts and Costco's to continue to thrive and to receive populations to them. So as Walmart asks a farmer, for instance, for 10,000 heads of lettuce, the farmer who cannot supply these gets marginalized, starts losing money, and is eventually eased out or gobbled up. They lose money because they produce food with love and care, quality over quantity. They have fewer items, but more varieties. It's not that the price is necessarily higher. It's the obscene commodification of food production that drives prices lower, like Amazon iPhone cases, for instance, that these single farmer operations cannot compete against. So the vicious cycle continues. So to recap, we used to live in agro-centric communities. As cities grew, Walmart demands more. The small farmer gets sidelined or melded into large farms. You can see the timeline here. Food gets commoditized. More chemical and genetic modifications are needed for higher efficiency farming. And you've got chemical giants and pharmaceuticals owning your food products. Just 50 years ago, 1,000 small and family-owned seed companies were producing and distributing seeds in the United States. By 2009, there were fewer than 100. Today, just 4 agrochemical giants control over 60% of our global seed scale sales. Something's wrong here. The casualty is biodiversity. Again, I'm going to repeat this because it's so important to emphasize this. And I'm going to repeat the same one. Lettuce had 497 varieties 100 years ago. Actually, it was just 87 years ago. Today, there are less than 36. And this is the case with varieties or biodiversity in animals and plants. So the crux of all of this is soil and its preservation in a new paradigm that I'm looking to speak about that we need to rebuild. It's absolutely vital that we understand soil and why it's critical to human life. I want you to think about soil like a city. In a city, you have a harmonious interaction of professionals working together and living together, doctors, lawyers, engineers. We live in organized structures like building, roadways, and there are utilities that flow around the city, in and out of the city, and people who have jobs to do. If I eliminate, say, just one critical profession, doctors, what do you think would happen? The city would hum along for a while, and then people would get sick and sicker. Society would potentially eventually break down to the sick. Soil is the same thing. Soil is very similar. There are over 150,000 professional species living in soil. They all have jobs to be done. They live in structures that they make, and insects, worms, microorganisms all harmoniously flow in and out of this soil structure, like highways and buildings, including they grow plants, they get rid of waste, reusing waste, etc. If we impacted just one important species of these microbes or insect populations, the soil would still work, but it would eventually stop working correctly after some time, perhaps a few seasons, because each species does have a job to be done. This creates an imbalance, and that imbalance shows up in the plant or the fruit or the animal that eats that plant, and eventually the human being, eventually causing the human body to become imbalanced itself. And when a human body is imbalanced, it becomes sick. The point here is that, very important, that living microorganisms and living organic matter in the soil begets living plants for living humans. And we are doing exactly the opposite of that when we use chemicals. So quick word here, I'm going to dive slightly deep, not get too sciencey on you, but when microbes and root hairs interact with each other, they create minerals such as fulvic acid and humic acid. And I'm going to collectively name them as humates. When humates interact with plants, they enable plants to absorb these minerals from the soil. When we eat that plant comes into our stomach, and then it comes into our intestines, and it gets absorbed into the circulatory superhighway. And the bloodstream takes these humates to each and every one of our cells in our body, and they get absorbed. If you do not have these humates, the minerals do not get absorbed. So, satiety doesn't happen in the stomach. Satiety happens at the cellular level. The body will continue to beg for food if the cell doesn't get what it needs on a daily basis. Those essentials that I spoke about in the beginning. So going back to what's happening in farming today, the chemical-based farming that we experience is causing an imbalance in the microbial population to the tune of 99% of our farms in the US are based on a chemical-based agriculture. We drive tractors over the land, and if you see dirt like this flying, it means that there's no soil structure. It's all dead dirt because there's no living organic matter in it. This means that the food that we're eating 99% of the time is empty, because without fulvic acid or the humates, little nutrients are getting absorbed into our cell. Which do you think tastes better here? Taste is the first tell that the plant is healthy. If you're getting good taste, it means that the balance in the plant is correct. Today, most food tastes like water. And for those of you who have traveled, we know what tasty food tastes like. The technocrats say that we're running out of farming land. It's actually quite the opposite. We're running out of variations in crops and animals and food choices. Our food is now made up of variations of based on genetically modified corns, genetically modified beet, genetically modified wheats. The point being that the food no longer provides us with those essentials. A quick word on a new tech that's rearing itself to becoming a $25 billion market by 2024 in just a couple of years. And it's called hydroponics or ponics. And there's a couple of different variations of that. Hydroponics, to point that one out, uses water and external synthetic, meaning non-living nutrients as a basis to grow food. I liken that to a brain-dead patient. So a brain-dead patient is given just enough slop to keep it alive, quote unquote. I would say hydroponics is almost similar. It looks like a plant, it grows a plant, it looks like a plant, it quacks like a plant, but does it give you the nutritional essentials that the plant is meant to? And the answer is no, and we're doing a study on that. The nutrition could never be classified as natural or organic, and there's a lobbying effort going on as we speak to classify organics to classify hydroponics or ponics grown plants as organics. Last point, these texts are not sustainable sources of food. They actually add waste back into the environment and are far from healthy. So I'll talk about, so let's move on. I want to talk about regeneration, but before I talk about regeneration, I want to talk about the word sustainability, bandied around and thrown around incessantly. Sustainability, quote unquote, is misappropriated today. We don't want to sustain our degenerated environment. We need to place systems and processes in place that are regenerative first, and then sustain a cyclically regenerative system. So when somebody uses that word, just ask them exactly what are they sustaining. So expanding population centers force corporations to solve for food production and distribution and efficiency. The more volumes of food, the further genetic and chemical interventions and modifications are required. If this trend continues, we have 60 years before our soils will be completely wrecked, that humanity will lose all of its land, all of its farming land. And it takes time to regenerate this back. It's not necessarily the end of the world, but it will have a massive extinction effect on most species and will ultimately lead to our own likely issues that actually we're already seeing. A quick word on organics. Organic is now just a label. It's watered down. There's a new label out there called Real Organic by the Organic Consumers Association, because now if you take the definition of organic by the FDA, they allow synthetic chemicals within that definition. So I'm proposing a shift. I'm proposing a shift to a regenerative city. There's no way to stop the trending towards centralization of population centers from metropolises to megacities. So we have to develop living processes with these in mind, circular processes. In this new paradigm that I'm proposing, the city takes minimal inputs from Earth, utilizes them, and returns a net positive set of materials back to Earth, meaning we waste less than we use up. I know this sounds like a massive coordinated effort, and so I'm going to narrow the scope for you. What I've come up with is, rather than bending nature and our farms to produce volumes of food, the responsibility of food can be rechanneled back to people where it belongs. So my proposal for this shift entails growing your own greens, and that's the narrowing of the scope. I don't want you to think of this as such a massive problem that needs to be solved. We're trying to solve this problem at a micro level by growing your own greens in your own home or condo, if you live in an urban center or anywhere actually. And we've created the ability for people to grow organic vegetables in an appliance, much like a Keurig for fresh salads, on your countertop or your wall. And the key still is organic soil. The advantages of these are obvious: better health and wellness for people, a complete transparency in the food that you're eating, less waste, a return again to democratizing farming or democratic farming. I'm not able to say that word for some reason. And it's cheaper than the current prohibitive pricing of organics today by 50 to 70%. And it'll also drive biodiversity, which is so important. Again, I've been speaking about food. Food is a massive $1 trillion market. But specifically, I'm speaking about greens. Let's start off with greens in your own homes in an urban center. So discussing food growth without discussing the circular effect is incomplete. And so my proposal is this: as the economies of scale of these tiny farms begin to take hold in the urban centers, in a condo or an office tower, we propose to bring stakeholders in. Of course, the consumer is a stakeholder, but the management, the developers, and the waste management entities are also stakeholders. We can take the compostable table scraps and soil waste from condo towers, process it mechanically and then biologically in the basement of the office tower or the condo tower, and then send it back out to rejuvenate the soils for our farmlands, and also use it as an ingredient that we would use to rebuild soils for the appliances. That's the proposal here. We would send waste back to the condo tower and then rejuvenate it, and we create a circular effect. My final thought on this, or my final slide on this, is that we've won a UN-sponsored project to do exactly just that in Portugal. They're creating 125 villages in a rural community where they're going to put up 6,250 homes that will house the tiny farms. We're going to place the tiny farms in there, and the community will get together, and within each of these villages, they will take their table scraps, their compostable waste, bring it to a center within that village, compost it, and partake in a circular economy. Thank you, and I will open it up for questions.
Aamar, thank you so much. We're going to open it up for Q&A. Aamar comes from his heart, from the passion of going through his transition from Wall Street to the teeny farms. So with that said, let's open it up to Aamar. Aamar, if you want to take that last slide off the screen, we'll open it up for questions for Aamar.
I would just add a comment. I'm a bit of a hobby farm. I have like 38 fruit trees on my property.
Great.
And I source my soil from a local nursery that makes its own soil. So I totally agree. The biggest thing I had to relearn is how quickly food goes bad. Because you're so used to that having a peach lying on the table for a week and it's still good. But if you pick one from the tree, it lasts maybe 2 or 3 days and it's done. But yeah, the taste and everything else, it's like, yeah, so basically 30 fruit trees, a couple of veggie boxes. But yeah, I totally agree with nutrients, taste, and everything in between. It's second to none. But if you live in Southern California, let me hook you up with my local nursery. He makes his own dirt with no compost in it. If you
love that.
Your own stuff.
I would love that. I'm actually leaving Canada. I'll be entering the US. I'm zigzagging across the US, and I'll be making my home in the near future in Austin. Would love to swing by.
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah, right here in Southern California, Aamar. When you come by, we'll all get together.
Awesome.
Other questions, other comments?
Yeah, Aamar, hi, it's Christopher. 7 years ago, I remember you bring a deja vu back to me. I got a call from a gentleman, Indian European, who had a business plan that needed financing. His vision was to franchise rooftop farming in San Francisco. And he promised this vision would alleviate urban heat island effect, saving energy, curb energy costs by providing insulation for the buildings, offset carbon emissions, absorb pollutants and stormwater. And I told him that the commercial bank I worked at did not lend capital to startups, and the best idea would be to apply for a grant from an environmental protection program. And if I recall, this plan boasted about 50,000 pounds of produce every year per building for those interested in greening their roofs. So my question is, given you have a finance background, are commercial banks now looking at financing these types of farming models as standard business verticals to monetize?
So they're not financing this. We're still in the equity stage.
Yeah.
I don't mean me personally, but the industry.
Yeah.
And the industry is focusing on centralized farming, the hydroponics. They're raising equity rounds of hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm in the same boat. I'm raising a round right now as a startup. My approach is different. Yeah. I started off the talk by saying that how we've become centralized in society, right? Centralized. We've moved from an agrocentric society to a centralized farming and food distribution society. I do not think that we can solve this by having a centralized solution. We need to put farming and food production back into the hands of people again, so that we can control the seed population, the seed sales, the seed growth. We cannot have large agro companies control our seed. What's happening with the seedless watermelon? What's happening with the seedless squash? The seeds are taken out. They're taken out from our control, our democratic control. They're being owned and patented by these large agrochemical entities, and we can't use them again. If we don't take control of our food, that's why I'm going strictly B2C. And I want to put that back into our hands. And you know what? The banks are not interested in a guy like me. I'm looking for you know, for lack of a better word, a billionaire, yes, some philanthropist who can
Angel money.
Worried about their grandchildren's future.
Yeah. Other questions for Aamar?
Yeah, Aamar, I grew up in the 50s on a farm in Michigan, and the taste of the food compared to the food you buy now, even at Whole Foods, no comparison. I mean,
Right.
one tomato was like a feast.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's cellular satiety. That's what it is. When you eat that, you feel totally satisfied because your cells are getting satiated.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
When I worked in my first job coming out of college, I worked for Hunt Wesson Foods in a tomato processing plant. And we used to, and this was back in the early 60s, we would get what they called beefsteak tomatoes. They were so delicious. They were gorgeous. But up in Central California, the companies learned to build tomatoes that could be picked by a machine that are hard, round, and you could hardly break them open with anything. Totally different tomato. So we went from beefsteak tomato to these machine tomatoes that could be picked by a machine. And I remember it well because I worked there for 8 years. And over that period, I saw the change developed University of California, Davis into these tasteless kind of fleshy things that had less liquid in them because you got more production and more weight from the tomato. So I experienced that in food processing back in the 60s. Other questions for Aamar?
I mean, just one thing I was going to add is, like, even we just think locally, Myers lemon ripe is actually orange, lime ripe is actually yellow. And most people think limes are green, but you never be able to get them in yellow because no farmer will let them grow to that point because it's not financially viable.
That's a loss of biodiversity. It's
Right.
it's truly sad. It's truly sad.
Aamar, this is also an issue, as you pointed out, of the corruption of language, where, you know, the word organic just by itself has been corrupted and misused. So people go to the store and they say, well, this is organic. Well, what does that mean? So the issue is people have to understand the correct correlation between what organic food means. And we have to adjust to our laws and say, well, if somebody's going to go out and make a profit or twist the meaning of these words, I have 4 grandsons. What they eat matters is for their health. I'm concerned about it. And I think everybody is concerned about the safety of the food they eat and the pharmaceuticals and the health they get. But so many of these large companies are just producing things that may not serve that health. So where do we go to adjust the language and the truth we're being told?
Unfortunately, it's a losing battle. The power rests in the hands of these large, giant corporations. The Organic Consumers Association is such a beautiful organization. They're people on the ground, they're farmers, they're beautiful people, but they're losing. They're just losing.
Other questions for Aamar?
Mark, great presentation. I just wanted to ask you, and I'm not going to hold you to these numbers, but if somebody said, you know, I'd like to build one of these in my home, my condo, Are you talking about a Keurig investment? Are you talking about a mortgage payment? Round them, what are you looking at?
So just to clarify, are you speaking about building it yourself or
Well, maybe a
purchasing?
kit was available, maybe even at Whole Foods, because I see now they're selling little hydroponic things. So just curious, are you talking about thousands of dollars, hundreds of dollars?
Yeah, I'll speak about I'll answer the question with a twofold answer. The first one is our product will be $200, for instance, and then there'll be an ongoing soil because we are controlling the soil, we're making the soil, and seeds. And
Do you
we're
mean
guaranteeing the
tiny
seeds.
farm, Aamar? Does that you
The
you
tiny
said our
farm.
product?
The
You
tiny
mean
farm.
Tiny farm. Yeah, you
That's
saw
right.
a picture of it. That's the tiny farm. So that's what he's talking about.
So that's one. And if you wanted to build it yourself, please do. Please take control of your own food. I don't care about whether you buy it from me or just take control of your food for your health. And you can build it in a very rudimentary way with lights. Again, it's not the sun, but I live in a cold climate, right? I don't get sun year round. So for those people who live in Dubai, who experience an extreme non-growing climate, they need something indoors. So you can build something very rudimentarily speaking for a few $100s, a couple of $100s, and then you can go up from there.
Other questions for Aamar? Other comments?
Melissa?
So
I was
you
hoping
were
you
gonna
would
hear
ask
from
me.
me,
I was
of course.
hoping
Melissa
that
up there on the
I-
farm.
yes. I was hoping to
You were
speak
going to
with
hear
you.
from me. So one thing I want to applaud you for is the pointing out that the organic is a total joke. It is a marketing scheme. It is no different than conventional farming. However, I will point out we have the safest food in the world in the US. And
Agreed.
what I really encourage people to think about that's very sustainable for them is looking at where their food is coming from, because they don't follow the same rules internationally, especially in South America, that we follow here. And so from a food safety standpoint, you're so further ahead buying US grown food than somewhere else. Especially since a lot of that comes Chile and South America. The other thing I really applaud with what you're doing is I've worked in the whole food chain, and we have a couple challenges, right? One, people want food that lasts for a week because they don't want it to go bad. So that's what the market demands of these growers. And in response, if they want to stay in businesses, this is what they've had to deliver to the grocery stores. Grocery stores want the same apples year round. They want plums.
Yeah.
They want all year round. And to get these contracts with Sam's Club and the companies that keep these farms, family farms, typically in business, it's responding to the desires of the consumer versus really what we want is good flavor. But that's not what we're buying. We want beautiful fruit and beautiful vegetables. And so I love that you're bringing opportunities for fresher things, because especially as you go further east, the Midwest and the East in the US specifically, they don't get great produce.
No, we
You're
don't.
giving an opportunity for them to get better greens, which are a huge part of, a great salad. I can get some of the other fixins. I can get some almonds to put on it and some great croutons, but starting with a great leafy green is a real asset. So I applaud you for those things. I will remind everyone on this call that the vast majority of our farms are still family farms. And they're grown
That comes from a farmer at Melissa up there in on a real farm. What'd you say, 5th or 6th generation on that farm? That's awesome.
The
Thank you
food
for
we
that.
grow is very important to us. So thank you for your contribution to this ecosystem.
Other
thing I would add
questions?
to that is have a list of how fruit typically grows, like strawberries in certain time frames. Because if you buy fruit that's out of season, it's not going to come locally. So stick to what
And it's not even going to be good.
No, I mean,
just tastes like cardboard.
If it's strawberry season locally, then buy strawberries. Don't buy them in December or some other places when it's not the right time.
Go to the farmer's market. Other question? One more question? Comment?
I have. Can I share a comment, Bill?
Pardon?
I have a comment. Just
go ahead.
In support of Melissa's comment, one of our clients is a big pistachio grower in California and Arizona. And in terms of food safety, he was saying that there's a fungus that grows naturally on pistachio trees And in some cases, it can cause a carcinogen in the nuts. And the US growers have figured out a way to genetically eliminate that fungus. And our pistachios are safer. And in the Middle East and especially the Persian farmers, they have not adapted that technology. And so a lot of our crop is going to Europe now because the people in Europe don't want to take the risk. And he also added that if you knew what went on at those organic farms, you would never buy organic food.
So true.
As a farmer, he does not buy organic farm food.
Other comments?
Bill, I have one.
Yes.
So there's both a comment and question. Aamar, great presentation. I really loved it. You're speaking something that's near and dear to my heart. And growing up, my dad grew vegetables, and I'm trying to do the same. What I'm seeing is, and this is a more question for you, is I'm hearing about supply chain being disrupted even in the food industry, and that there potentially could be a shortage of food. And so so one is, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And two, I've been looking at growing microgreens and sprouting as an alternative. So what are your thoughts on that? And I love your idea. And I'm going to look up your website.
Okay, sure. We're in a very fragile time right now. The pandemic, in my opinion, is not going away anytime soon. And that has exposed the fragility of our supply chain. And if something breaks, we're going to be out of food. And the most vulnerable populations are going to suffer. We may be able to afford the obscene organic prices or the obscene food prices, whatever they are. And food prices are just gone obscene. And I think there was a reference to that. You want to control your food. If you don't control your food, somebody else has control over it, and we have no choice after that. That's all I can say about that question. Now, with respect to microgreens and sprouting, please make sure it's in organic soil, because if you don't grow food in soil, and I had a slide on this, the sciencey one, you're not getting the humates that enable the absorption, like the toll booth, into your cell membrane of the minerals that the plant that you're eating is giving you. So if you're eating broccoli sprouts, which is one of the best greens you can possibly eat, it has a plethora of minerals, maybe 83%. It's absolutely amazing. But if you're not, people sprout, and they sprout it in like these glass jars, and they eat it, but it's not creating those humates. And those humates are exactly what enable you to get the satiety at the cellular level.
That's great. Aamar, thank you so much. We're time constrained here. We need to move on, but such a deep subject and such a great subject. We definitely will want to bring you back maybe mid next year from Austin, Texas, to show how you've adapted there and what's going on with your tiny farm. So again, thank you so much. Let's hear it for Aamar.
Thank you. Thank you.